Viktor Frankl said, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way." This is Finding Human with Sue Jackson. Stay tuned for the next hour as Sue explores the human psyche, what makes us tick, and how to live better, more fulfilled and more meaningful lives. Only on 101.9 High FM.
Hello, this is Sue Jackson, and my guest today is Smoky Harold Simon, and his daughter standing by, Eliza Pellig, to help with Zoom, and I've got my grandson Joshua standing by to help me with Zoom. Welcome, Smoky. Before we start, I must just thank Joel Klotnick and Peter Bailey for suggesting that I have you on my program, and also for putting me in contact with you. And then Peter suggested that I read South Africa's 800, which is all about the Machalniks who went from South Africa to Israel in 1948. And it was quite amazing, I must admit. That book has just opened my eyes and everyone who's read its eyes. Hello, Smoky. How are you today?
Hi. Shalom to you, Sue. It's a pleasure meeting you, and it's an honor to be on your program.
Thank you so much.
Thank God. I'm well. As you mentioned, I've reached the 100th birthday, and I truly have very much to be grateful for. I feel in good shape, and I have my wife Myra, who is sitting right by me at present as well. So we're all ready to give you a little narrative whenever you're ready.
Great. Hello, Myra. I'm so pleased you're there. I actually saw a photo of you in the Nefesh Benefesh post that was on the YouTube. What I want to just tell everyone listening in, that whoever wants to hear Smoky's story and Myra's story also, to have a look on Google or Safari, and there are lots of YouTubes and lots of videos. You can see what they both look like. You can actually hear a lot of Smoky's story. Now, Smoky, first of all, you are from South Africa originally. You were from the Orange Free State, from Bultfontein, is that right?
Which, of course, is also in the Free State. You probably familiar with the name of Winburg, and
yes.
That's really where I went to school and where I grew up. A few years at university, I had 2 degrees and a chartered accountant. After I finished my final exam, I volunteered to serve in the South African Air Force because the war against Nazi Germany, of course, had been on for a couple of years.
And were you aware in South Africa at the time of what was actually happening in Germany and Poland? Were you aware of the atrocities then? Is that why you joined up with the Air Force?
Very much so. You may know that quite a large number of German Jewish refugees came to South Africa. They were quite a community. And in the course of my work as a article clerk in an accountant's office, I met several of them. And as a result of which, I became really significantly aware of what had happened to the Jews in Germany, including Kristallnacht and the terrible events that had taken place and the destruction of Jewish property and the ill treatment of Jews. And I developed a tremendous hostility for the Germans, and I made up my mind that I was going to volunteer to serve in the South African forces in the war against Germany.
Thank you, Smoky. We're just going to advert quickly.
This is Finding Human with Sue Jackson, only on 101.9 High FM.
Right now, Smoky, we're going to hear a very short YouTube of yours from Yom HaZikaron, a message that you gave out this year, and they're going to be playing it now.
4,800 volunteers, known as Mahal, came from 59 countries to fight with their brethren in Israel's War of Independence, 1948 to 1949. As these volunteers were mainly veterans of World War II, their wartime experience and professional skills were of paramount importance to the Israel Defense Force in its war against 6 Arab armies: Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Kauqji's Army of Liberation, which were determined to obliterate the newborn state of Israel. Israel's victory in the war was unprecedented in the annals of military history. In the words of Prime Minister Ben-Gurion, the Mahal forces were the diaspora's greatest contribution to Israel's survival. And Yitzhak Rabin stated, "You came to us when we needed you most." The South African Jewish community can be justly proud of the South African component in the forces of Mahal. On this Yom HaZikaron, as in every year, we bow our heads and direct our thoughts to those wonderful Mahal volunteers who paid the ultimate price by giving their lives in defense of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Yisrael Chai.
This is Finding Human with Sue Jackson, only on 101.9 High FM.
Hello, this is Sue Jackson, and I'm back with Smoky Simon, and you've just been hearing him talking about Mahal and at the Yom HaZikaron ceremony. And what I would like to just tell you is a bit about Smoky. First of all, Smoky helped found Israel's Air Force in May 1948. You were a co-founder of that in the new state. And you were Chief of Air Operations in the War of Independence. You were also a founder of World Mahal. Now, Smoky, we have a lot of mixed listeners, not all Jewish. So would you please just explain what Mahal is?
Mahal is a Hebrew acronym. In Hebrew, it's Mitnadvei Chutz La'aretz. That's volunteers from abroad. So it's really a Hebrew acronym.
Okay, and in the War of Independence, when you decided that you were going to Israel, did you decide on the spur of the moment that you were going to go, or what actually happened?
Well, after World War II, like all other servicemen, I was rehabilitating myself. I established a small office as an accountant, and I was trying to carve a future for myself. And then we saw the war clouds gathering over Palestine. And the South African Zionist Federation did a magnificent job in getting in touch with Jewish ex-servicemen, urging them to volunteer to serve in the impending war. It was quite clear that there was going to be this confrontation between the Jews and the Arabs. I was engaged to my wife Myra at the time, and I decided that I'm going to volunteer to go to Israel. I had something to, and I told Myra that we would have to postpone our wedding until I got back. And then she informed me that she was also going to Palestine, which was a little bit of an astonishment to me. We decided then to get married, and really we didn't tell our folks that we were off to Palestine. We didn't want to have the family upset at the time of our marriage.
I'm sure.
So we were really in the very first group of South Africans organized by the Fed. As I said, they did a wonderful job.
We're going to get back to that in a minute, Smoky. We've just got to go to advert again. I'm sorry. It's
okay.
This is Finding Human with Sue Jackson, only on 101.9 High FM.
I have got as my guest today Smoky Simon, who turned 100 in May. He is a legendary hero, first operations, the chief of air operations in the War of Independence. And until 1950, I think you said, Smoky, and you were on the first, you and Myra were on the first flight out of South Africa as volunteers, as Mechalniks. Is that right?
Correct. That's right.
And so when you got to Israel, how were you welcomed, or were you welcomed?
Well, it was rather interesting. We arrived on the 9th of May 1948, right in the midst of the British evacuation, because you will recall that Britain at the time was the mandatory power over Palestine. The mandate was due to terminate on the night of the 14th, 15th May at midnight. And there were hundreds of troops and military personnel, the British. We were a little bit concerned because the Fed asked us to deliver certain confidential papers to Ben Gurion, and these papers were hidden in Myra's underwear, and we thought if the British should arrest us and search, we might be in for trouble.
Good heavens.
They were so occupied with the evacuation process that we really got through without any difficulty.
So they didn't search her underwear?
No, they didn't search her underwear.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the next day, the 10th of May, we're signed on for the Israel Air Force. And on the 14th of May, as you well remember, Ben Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, interestingly, the first Arab army to attack Israel was the Jordanian army, which had been supplied by the British, trained by the British, and led by the British. The Jordanian army attacked even before the state was declared on the same day. And the Air Force received an order from the army to do a reconnaissance so as to report on the strength of the Jordanian army. And it was a very somber situation. We saw their tanks and their armored cars and their artillery and their troops. The Etzion block had already been burnt down to the ground. And we certainly felt that there was a very precarious time ahead for us. In any event, I just want to add a rather unique experience. The pilot of the aircraft of which I was the navigator was also a South African Machelnik, Boris Senior, who did a wonderful job in the Israel Air Force. And he and I did this reconnaissance. And we took off from the airfield in Tel Aviv, which was known as the Sde Dov airfield in Tel Aviv, Palestine. But when we landed after our flight of a few hours, we landed at Sde Dov, Tel Aviv, Israel, because
that's amazing.
In Ben Gurion had declared the state of Israel. So we took off from Palestine and we got back to Israel.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, you actually said, and you said one what you found absolutely amazing was the returning to our ancient land. It's a living miracle of biblical proportions. Well, just even that story, Smoky, of leaving Tel Aviv, Palestine, and a few hours later coming back to Tel Aviv, Israel, I mean, that is in itself an amazing miracle.
Yeah, it was really quite unique, I must say. But the miracle that you referred to is something that I try to urge my fellow Israelis with all the problems that are ahead of us to remember that this was the greatest, that when you think of an ancient nation returning to its ancient land after 2,000 years is an absolute miracle. And so we have the privilege of living in that miracle. And sometimes when we feel a bit overwhelmed with the problems, we must never forget that we are living in a miracle of biblical proportions.
You know, those words are so wise, to tell you the truth. I actually wanted to ask you, you had gone through World War II as in the Air Force, then into the Israel Air Force. There must have been many times when you were very afraid. How did you actually cope with your fear? And what advice would you give the IDF today, all the defense forces? What advice would you give them, Smoky?
I was really very fortunate in one respect. I felt that I was going to make it, that I was going to survive World War II and the War of Independence. You know, it's a very, very personal factor. Some of the guys are worried all the time. Will I make it? And I must say that I was extremely fortunate in that respect, that I didn't have a troubled mind and a troubled heart all the time. I knew, of course, the risks involved, but if I had to give anyone a little bit of advice in that respect, I would say, look, life is really a series of challenges, whether in the civilian sphere or in the military sphere, as long as one feels that you are doing your best to make a significant contribution. I said that I believe that each one should have the motivation to feel that he or she is making a contribution to the country and to the society. And that should be the overriding consideration, which I think is far more important than just to try to accumulate as much wealth as you can for yourself, because we're an integral part of society, and we have an obligation to the society, and in our case, of course, to the state of Israel as well.
Absolutely. So, what you're saying is that you need to have a purpose of actually, if you're going to live in Israel especially, you have to have a purpose and a meaning to live there. Otherwise, I think going into the IDF is very difficult. But your family have certainly, you said Am Yisrael Chai, they have certainly been part of that, haven't they?
They have indeed. Yes.
You have 4 children.
Yeah, we have 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Both our sons were fighter pilots in the Israel Air Force, with very good records, happily. And our eldest daughter has 5 children, and so we are quite a little tribe, actually. We have 15 grandchildren and 18 great-grandchildren, with the 19th expected shortly. So, as I said, we really developed a mini tribe in Israel.
What a blessing. And you and Myra have been married for 72 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Our marriage matches that of the state of Israel.
Yes.
72 years, and our marriage has lasted so far for 72 years.
Wow. What is the secret to a happy marriage for you?
And the secret of a happy marriage, that's I wish I really knew the secret to be able to guide someone. I think really to accept the fact there are going to be hiccups somewhere along the way. It's not just a love affair, which is really just a dream. Families have their problems, and like everything else, one has to try to solve the problem peacefully, happily. I know one of the questions to which you referred was the differences in in political outlooks in Israel. Should there be annexation or should there be annexation? And there's been so much violent rhetoric, it's really quite unbelievable. After all, differences of opinion are perfectly legitimate in one's married life and in one's social life and in the political life. But the Israelis, bless them, when it comes to differences of opinion, really it's a great pity, because the rhetoric becomes absolutely violent. And that is why a lot of people have lost respect for politicians as a result of their behavior.
And you've certainly seen a lot of politicians in your lifetime, and you've also seen a lot of prime ministers, Israeli prime ministers, presidents and prime ministers, haven't you?
Indeed. You know, and when one thinks of the stature of men like Ben Gurion, you know, when he declared the state of Israel, I've asked myself maybe hundreds of times, how did he have the courage and the inspiration to declare? He challenged fate. The future of the Jewish people and the newborn state, the courage that man had, I believe it could only be a divine inspiration. He knew that there were 6 Arab armies that were ready to obliterate the state of Israel, and yet he declared the state of Israel. And then you have Menachem Begin, for whom I had profound respect. The man's wisdom and his courage and his morality. And so we've seen Levi Eshkol, who wasn't a very colorful prime minister, but a wonderful man. He established kibbutzim and moshavim and whatnot. He really contributed enormously towards the development of the country. So it's been very interesting seeing the different prime ministers, the leaders of our country. And of course, we're always hopeful that the leadership be competent and successful, especially knowing that we are really facing some very, very critical situations.
Difficult times.
Never lose hope and never lose our confidence.
That's a wonderful message. We just have to break for an ad break again.
High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
I'm back with Smoky Simon. And Smoky, I would actually like to ask Eliza, your daughter here. Eliza, your mom also played a major role in the War of Independence. Why don't you just tell me a bit about her and how you feel about having 2 famous parents?
Thank you. It's good to be on your show. And I'm happy you brought up my mom, because she's a hero too. She talks about it a little bit less, and she shares the story in less detail, but she was actually there and she put her life at risk as well. And she and my father took upon this journey in a very collaborative manner. So it's incredibly inspiring to grow with her as a very strong and very independent woman, which was a great role model, who was a great role model for me. I do want to say that I didn't grow up thinking my parents were famous at all. So I think from that perspective, it was actually the opposite. They were very humble and very modest, and we lived a very simple, lovely life. So I think a lot of the celebrity experience that my parents and my dad especially are enjoying now are luckily in the last decade, so he can really enjoy and get a reward for what they had done 60 and 70 and 80 years ago. Life at home was actually beautiful and simple and modest, and my parents were incredibly humble. And I really didn't even know much about the stories. I've learned in the last decade, like many other Israelis, the origin of the Israeli Air Force through his speeches. And he really picked it up only in the last 10 years or so. It was almost like the best kept secret. It was really undertold and over silent. And we never learned it at school. Most of my friends and my colleagues have never heard of Machalniks. And it was sort of a well-kept secret. And my dad, for his entire life, or I should say his adult life, for the last 50 years, has been the chairman of World Machal, really trying to keep the story alive and telling it more broadly. And luckily, momentum had picked up about 10 years ago. And he's gotten many, many opportunities and lots of stages on which to tell the story. And he's given lectures in multiple countries around the world and on TV and radio like today, and living rooms and lecture halls to youngsters and to adults and new recruits into the army and the new Machalniks. Every generation, every new recruit group that comes in these years, Smoky addresses them personally. He's given lectures in high-tech sectors, new Olim, old Olim, commanders of Air Force, police, etc. So it's really been, I'm so happy that over the last 10 years, the story has gotten tremendous coverage finally. And
it certainly is a story that has to be told. Just going back to your mom, she was a meteorologist in the South African Air Force. So when she got to Israel, she also went straight into the new Israeli Air Force. Is that right?
Yes, she went in the same day as he did. They signed up the next day. Two youngly married couple. They couldn't speak the language. They show up in the Middle East on the 9th of May. They sign up for the army on the 10th of May. And the war starts 4 days later. My dad speaks a lot about the military activity and battles and challenges. They speak very little about their private life, which is probably as amazing too. They were 3 couples living in one apartment, living on food rations, having communications with their parents through letters that went back and forth every few months.
By ship.
Or by plane, but they were, by the time they left the country and by the time they landed, and they were in some mailbox in the South African Federation in Johannesburg until they were got into the family. So it was really hardship. I think of the youngsters today who live in different countries of the world in peace times, and we've got email and we've got Zoom and we've got WhatsApp and we've got chats and we can talk for free. And they were in a war zone, living in dire straits, in eating with food stamps and communicating with their parents very, very seldom, no visitors, no exchanges. I think the human toll and the personal toll and the emotional toll must have been huge. And I think they tend to take that for granted and ignore it, where I think it's actually quite admirable.
I do too. And then you were in the IDF as well.
Right.
When you were there, did you know anything about your dad and your mom's past then? Was anything said to you?
Oh, yes. We absolutely knew. We knew they were in the Air Force. We knew they were volunteers. A lot of their friends were from the Machal days. So we knew it was a big piece of their life, and it was also quite a big piece of ours in terms of Independence Day celebrations and Yom Ha'atzmaut, and the whole Air Force connection, and my brothers going into the Air Force. So we knew we had an incredibly strong tie to the Israeli Air Force, and that my parents were the founding members. But I didn't know the actual story, how they got here, how they smuggled the aircraft, how they built the first squadron, how they did the first attacks, what helped liberate Israel and stop the Egyptians and stop the different battles that happened on different fronts, and how these a few thousands of saint people who came from all over the world helped to build the army. I think the Israelis grew up thinking that was obviously one more story of the great Israelis. And I think just the story of the volunteers was a little underestimated, totally underestimated. And that's what shifted in the last decade for us, that we know how pivotal it was.
We're going to ad break. Thank you, Eliza. That was so nice hearing from you. We're just going to ad break.
This is Finding Human with Sue Jackson, only on 101.9 High FM.
Hi, this is Sue Jackson, and I'm back with Smoky Simon. Smoky, I wanted to know about the Mechalniks. I think there were 5,000 Mechalniks in the War of Independence. Is that right?
Yeah, there were 4,800 who came from 59 countries. The Air Force, the flying personnel over the period of the war, there were 426 Machal flyers, which included 84 non-Jews. 20% of the flying crews were non-Jews. And at this moment, I'll tell you of a lovely, ironic story. There was a guy by the name of Gordon Levitt, and he put it this way. He said, here, I find myself a non-Jewish Brit flying in the Jewish Air Force, serving in the Jewish Air Force, flying a German Messerschmitt plane, smuggled out of Czechoslovakia by Jewish and non-Jewish volunteers. And you know, in that sentence, he really wrapped up the story beautifully.
Oh my word, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And then just tell me, I remember reading something about a Butch Ben York. Tell me about Butch Ben York.
Yeah, he was a South African Machalnik. He was really an Anglo-Afrikaner in his background, and Ben Gurion put out a proposal that people living in Israel or serving in Israel should adopt a Hebrew name. So there were 3 South Africans in the Air Force. They were members of flying crews. And one of them said, okay, I'll take the name of Benzine. And another guy said, I'll take the name of Ben Gatkus. And this non-Jewish guy said, I'll take the name of Ben York. And that's how the story came about.
And through the years, have you kept contact because of being so involved and being one of the founders of the World Mechalnik? And are you still as involved with all the Mechalniks?
Because I really...
Are you still the chairman?
I'm still the chairman of World Machal, and I have wonderful secretarial help when I need it. And every year we have a very moving a ceremony on Yom HaZikaron to respect the Machniks who gave their lives. And we have very interesting people who attend our service. And most of the Machniks have really passed away. There were, so many colorful characters amongst the Machniks. They came mainly from the United States and South Africa and Britain and Canada, the flying crews I'm referring to at the moment. And we really, the one sector which is active is the American Machal in New York. They have, of course, everybody has become quite old, but there's some very wonderful volunteers, and they have some younger members who keep the office going. And as a matter of fact, one of our recent achievements was at the end of 2018, General Gadi Eisenkot, who was chief of the staff, he issued a formal citation of the role and the importance of Mahal in the War of Independence, and what a significant part of the IDF the Machniks constituted at the time.
We're going to have to end there, unfortunately, Smoky. I'm being told to wrap up from the studio. It's been wonderful speaking to you. I would like to just say, in my father's logbook, at the end, he had a little poem, and it was written by an airman, McGee, and it says, "I've topped the windswept heights with grace, where never lark nor even eagle flew, and while with silent lifting mind I've trod the untrespassed sanctity of grace, put out my hand and touched the face of God." It's so beautiful. It's beautiful. And I would like to just say thank you so much, and just end. We've got a song. We've got On Silver Wings, which is the song of the IAF, and that's going to be playing now. Thank you so much, Smoky. I will be in touch after the program. And thank you so much, Eliza, and best wishes to Myra. God bless. Thank you.